This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, it's Joey and me talking about controlling our ambition and where peanut butter belongs in the grocery store.
Woo! And now I'm back. From outer space, this is what a Joey sounds like. I'm right here in your ear face. No. Should we start over? No, we keep it?
Have you done that one before? I mean, you've probably done each one.
Who knows, really?
That's
This
okay.
is still what a Joey sounds like. And this is what an executive producer and author of Love in the Time of Cholera, Jess Vander, sounds like.
That was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and this is Jess. Hi.
Jess, do we have any corrections department this week? I don't think we do. I think everything that we said last week was obviously right. Just tackling the topic of disintegrating institutions with
Wow.
we couldn't have gotten anything we couldn't have gotten anything wrong talking about massive societal shifts. I don't think so.
Okay.
If you have corrections, send them to criticalnonsense@sylvain.co. You can reach us there or at thisisnonsense.com. We really like being corrected, so send them in. Or if you have topics that you want us to talk about, send them there too. We'd like to hear from you, mysterious listeners who tune in every week. Send us topics, please. That would be fun to cover some listener topics. Any housekeeping? I guess that was partially housekeeping. Yeah. And we're on YouTube now. We're there also. We're in so many places. Wherever you
in your
listen
ear
to your
holes
podcast.
and your sight balls.
In your ear holes and your sight balls. All right. Well then, without further ado.
No.
No.
That's a different one, right?
This is a different one. Yeah.
Good thing you like being corrections departmented.
Yeah. Because I get it wrong most of the time.
Or just riffing. You're just riffing.
Yeah. So Jess.
Hey.
Do you keep score?
Yeah.
Am I winning?
Yes.
All right. Nice. So I read an article this week, as I do occasionally. And the article was entitled "Stop Keeping Score" on The Atlantic. We'll put it in the show notes. But it was around this idea of basically sort of the fact that nothing good really comes from keeping score, and yet we're sort of constantly doing it. You already corrections department?
No, I just you trapped me. You keep score? That's great because you shouldn't.
Because you're wrong already. And if you're keeping score now, I'm winning more, apparently. But this idea of keeping score on top of, is not unique to America, but at times also feels like a uniquely American version of it exists, where we channel our ambition, right? Like there are entire sub generations. If you go into like the generational handbook called like the Joneses, where that generation is, a small generation, but it was like because of growing up with things like Leave It to Beaver and things like that are very much oriented around sort of external signifiers being a signal of their success. And, this article talks about entrepreneurs being oriented towards, their money or the growth of their company being a signal of their personal success. But what we know from myriad social science experiments and studies and journal articles is that these sort of extrinsic signals of success or validation are largely not great ways of finding happiness or satisfaction in your life. And so what I wanted to ask you, and we can deconstruct and maybe you can redeem your score keeping, is
Woof.
how do we, or is it even possible to reorient our ambition towards intrinsic rewards?
Wow, there's so many different pieces. Piece one, I think, is what are the rewards that we are keeping now that we presumably should not be keeping? I think about like even the phrase keeping score. It's like keeping score of what? Like I know for sure I've had conversations even with people at the company where like out to lunch or something and someone's like, "Oh, I've got you. Like I'll just like pay for your coffee." And I'm like, "No, don't do that. Because if you pay for my coffee, then I am tracking exactly how much I owe you, and I must at least rebalance that amount." And so like in that instance, the thing I'm keeping score of is like dollars spent needlessly on me that eventually need rebalancing, which is really funny because in response, a lot of my friends are like, "I would be insulted if you give me like exact Venmo change or something." Like that's just terrible. Don't do that. I'm like, how do you live this way? I'm the exact opposite of you.
Yeah, I mean, it is, right? Like, it is interesting to think about these things, right? Where, like, this is an instance where keeping score is actually potentially taking something away. Where, like, the person is trying to give you a gift, and by not allowing them to do that, which is a thing that may bring them happiness, you're sort of like removing that opportunity to demonstrate their affection.
Yep.
Right?
Totally. Which is not the same. I mean, that's like one kind of keeping score, right? I guess another kind of keeping score is like, how many notches have I earned compared to fellow people? For instance, the phenomenon, I don't know if you ever do this, but there's this horrible thing that you could entertain yourself by doing where you go onto LinkedIn and you search for people who went to your high school or your middle school, but like no one puts their middle school on LinkedIn, so it's hard to search that way. Or even college, and you just like see where they've ended up now, and you like look at what job titles they have, and you're just, I mean, like obviously I am a scorekeeper in that I have done this horrible thing where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, interesting to see where those people ended up, and maybe I'm just like outing myself as a terrible judgmental human being, but there's a fascination in that is, I think, more akin to the kind of scorekeeping that you're describing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting from a couple perspectives, right? Like, one of the things that so this article was written by a guy named Arthur C. Brooks, who's a social scientist, right? And he's writing it in this case as like, I think, as a social scientist oriented towards like, these certain types of things won't make you happy. At the same time, he was also, a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a conservative think tank, which is, those think tanks that are sort of like pro-business think tanks are often largely oriented towards these like extrinsic factors in business that they're trying to drive. So like, let's sort of call out that irony first, at least. But the point that you're making around, in this article talks about one of the ways to help increase happiness is to orient yourself towards others. And there's this trap of like, if you orient yourself towards others about comparison, right? Like how do you compare to them? Invariably, just the exercise of comparison and either putting yourself somewhere hierarchically against them or their successes is sort of a status exercise that will then either, may make you feel better for a moment, but won't necessarily make you happy, or immediately makes you feel worse because that person, you deem them to be like doing better or more successful than you are. Versus if you're thinking about what the other person needs. In the case of your friend who is trying to buy you a coffee because they're like, Jess, you have a coffee. I'm thinking about your needs. Let me get this thing for you to make you feel good. And you're like, shut it down.
Shut it down. That's not a gift I want. Well, it brings me to another love language component that's also other people oriented, but also is maybe a toxic or some might say a toxic form of like ambition seeking, where you're not seeking to be like one-upping others, but you're seeking positive affirmation from others, which I also certainly fall under that category of like, am very much motivated externally by other people approving me and things that I have done, which sounds yet again like another thing that is not supposed to be happening in this universe. But it's interesting because in my mind, you know, and maybe this is where I might contend with some of the argumentation in this article, is that can also keep me accountable to things that I otherwise would not be intrinsically motivated to do. Something where I know, like, not only will someone be proud of me, but I want this thing will make someone happy or respond in any kind of a way. And so I should do it, therefore. So it's yet another balance of like doing something for somebody, but that being external, but not necessarily always negative. It's messy.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like the question here, or sort of like this idea of being able to sort of control your ambition is an interesting one that I'd never thought about before, right? Like you hear this term, like this person is like type A, or this person is ambitious, or they're, you know, we have terms like status seeker or things like that. But the idea of being able to question, you know, like, can you control what the thing that you are choosing to be ambitious about? Right? Because like ambition is fundamentally just like high levels of motivation for a thing, right? Which in theory is like potentially a virtue. The question of like when does it sort of stray away from being a virtue is like, what, you know, like socially, are we deeming it of like, are you sacrificing things, other people's happiness or success or gains in order for, or, you know, in order to achieve your own gains or something like that, right? But like this idea of being able to reorient it towards a thing that you're passionate about or that brings you happiness is a difficult one, because that takes an amount of internal orientation to understand what makes you happy, to be able to like reroute. But it also means then potentially you have to like let go of those other extrinsic ones, right? Of like status or money. Not to say that you couldn't achieve status or money through sort of focusing your ambitions to something more intrinsic, but is not like the end state of that process, right?
Yeah, it's weird. In another way, the way I think about it is maybe a lot of our associations today with ambition are almost exclusively the highly external motivators, like you're cutthroat, right? Because you are willing to stop at nothing, and that is because you are then like the scorekeeping you're doing is like, how many people am I trouncing to get to blank, or you're insatiable, like I'm so highly motivated to get like goal oriented, right? Like I need to check a box off my list. And so therefore I am never satisfied because there's always another box to check or another tier to reach. It opens the question alternately for me of what does it look like, I guess, to when we start trying to define ambition by an intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, I think that becomes like potentially like a state versus a milestone, right? Like a lot of the extrinsic motivators are like, I got the validation or words of affirmation from someone. I achieved some level of income, or I got a certain job that I wanted, or lived a place that I wanted, or whatever, right? Which is, it sort of happens and it's done. It is sort of a moment, right? Like a lot of those extrinsic motivators don't last. I mean, there's maybe some things like status or something like that that are a little bit more of a state, but require sort of constant maintenance potentially when you're focusing on that thing. And so then oftentimes you're not focused on the thing that allowed you to achieve that level of status, right? It's potentially like why we find ourselves in an influencer culture where we're like, why is that person famous potentially? And it's like, oh, they're famous because they're famous, you know? Not to say that that person doesn't have good qualities. Right now I'm talking about like an imagined like simulacrum influencer, but I think that's why you know, it's not unusual for, you know, like people in our like work chat or something where someone's like, did you see what this thing happened in culture? And they're like, who's that person? Like what? Why is David Dobrik famous?
And you're arguing that's because those people are actually doing ambition right?
No, I'm arguing that I think that's why we find like this moment where the idea of like fame has become an equivalent, like in the way that the Joneses were, they're sort of keeping up with the Joneses orientation for external factors were like income, car, home, right? Like today, I think a lot of these extrinsic motivators are oriented towards like digital constructs, digital platforms that we've created. So like how many likes did you get?
Yeah.
Are you famous? Those types of things.
Got it. Yeah. It's almost like then the inverse. Maybe this won't resonate with you as much as it does me, but it made me think of something that my mom says all the time, and I kind of make fun of her for it. But it's the phrase, sometimes it's just so satisfying a craving, or it's like it just is, there's something so great about craving something and then satisfying that craving. Like it's typically food related. It's like I don't know why, but like I have this deep hankering for like a blueberry pie, and then you have a blueberry pie and it's like, wow, this is the best. But the reason I bring it up is it's almost the opposite of like, I can't explain it. I have a deep desire for a thing, and I'm now going to celebrate like my own achieving of that thing because yay, I did it. Yeah, I did it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think like, you know, there are these examples that you have in certain, I guess, career fields or pursuits, right? Like this idea of like the comedian's comedian is often a person who is like really pursuing comedy, but with not a ton of orientation towards fame or notoriety. Like it is truly like this sort of intrinsic pursuit of like a platonic form of comedy. And I think you have that same idea of like a writer's writer or, you know, a director's director. It's like the person that people who may have achieved greater levels of extrinsic signals of success still look to this other person who they feel like is doing something that is like, you know, it is the way I think a lot of musicians talk about Bob Dylan, who ultimately did get a incredible amount, or, you know, Leonard Cohen, who ultimately did achieve sort of extrinsic success in their pursuit, but they were sort of like disinterested in those things.
Joey, I'm going to do something that you usually do, which is name a thing. But I am like dying to call this something, and it's like maybe it sounds like an oxymoron at first, but feels right to call it effortless ambition. The idea that like you should not be trying so hard to like chase for a thing that you are being told to, or is you're going to get there by some other thing. Like it should just be a driving force. Like maybe that's literally what intrinsic motivation is, and we don't need extra jargon, but it feels like the answer to how we control our ambition is like giving in to the effortlessness that comes with it.
Yeah, there's like the purity of it, right? Like the thing is motivating in and of itself, and therefore you just keep doing it, right? And that you can sort of quiet the external factors. And I think this is like positive for like multiple reasons. One is like you sort of free yourself from caring about criticism as much as needing the positive affirmation, right? Like there is like a freedom of that, right?
Yeah, and maybe I will leave us to conclude this section with another thing that I learned from my dear friend Lemon. That is her nickname, not her real name. When you describe quieting the external factors, I am reminded of something brilliant where you're in imagine you're sitting in a boardroom in a meeting full of like very high level people. And all of a sudden, because you didn't eat breakfast because you were rushing to get here on time to like print out whatever, your stomach is grumbling, right? So your stomach is grumbling. You're in front of all these people. There's literally nothing that can be done about it. And the way to address this situation is by looking down at your stomach and being like, shh, stop it. And it's both extremely delightful, but it is also quieting the external factors that aren't in your control. And you know what is in your control? Showing up on time. Okay, weird way to end. But I had to share the story.
Well, I want to ask you, like, have you had I've definitely had this, but have you had that experience of having some extrinsic motivator achieved and being just like completely let down by that thing that you were driving towards?
I have something that maybe was like, I don't know if this counts. There are like two stories that I think of both like an intrinsic motivator, like I was mentioning when you brought up this topic to you earlier, of how much I am afraid to pursue like a professional future opening a bakery, some like far down the road vision, because what if that reverts something I am intrinsically motivated to do into an extrinsic activity, and like what a disaster that could be. But in the reverse of like, is there an extrinsic something that I was extrinsically motivated to do that went horribly wrong? I'm mostly just thinking of something that I was extrinsically motivated to do that maybe didn't matter because I was intrinsically motivated, that like I was driven by intrinsic motivation, which is anytime I talk about science Olympiad stuff, like that was like the whole thing is like, yeah, you theoretically like you get a medal if you do really well. And that's the whole point, is like you're trying to get a medal and you're trying to like give your team fewer points because fewer points wins. But ultimately it was like working on that with my brother and succeeding to our greatest capabilities. That was like the beautiful thing, which maybe is just proving your point again, it just in a different way, that the intrinsic motivation is the thing that wins out, even if there is an extrinsic motivator trying to wheedle its way in.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like genuinely, I don't think I'm not saying this as like a back pat or like that I'm some fucking like Buddhist centered, like, you know, like enlightened person. I just don't have a lot of like wants. Like I don't go through life wanting much. I don't, buy a lot of things. I don't look for a lot of things, but in my head at some point, like having a home, I think I just got that from my parents or culture or whatever, that like you should have a home, and that is like that is like an important thing that you should have. And I don't think it was even necessarily like in my head, I didn't associate it with like a marker of success. I think it was more like a milestone and a thing that you needed to do. And so we recently bought an apartment, and I hadn't built it up so much in my head or anything like that. I didn't think about it a lot. But when we did it, like once it was done, it was just like, we're still just like living in an apartment. Mm-hmm. We just happen to own this one. Like it does nothing for me. Like on sort of like an emotional or happiness level. Like I don't think I got any kind of boost from that, even though in my head it was going to be some sort of major milestone. But like even for our company or why I like my job, it has like nothing to do with external factors. And it was just like, I like thinking about things and talking about things with my friends. And then I found out like you can kind of do that for work. And I was like, cool. That sounds like a
Excellent.
good job because I like thinking about things and talking about things.
There you
Great.
go. You're in the right place.
I'm in the
We're
right
in
place.
the right place.
And that's why we have this show where we can think about things and talk about things and are not doing it for any sort of extrinsic motivations. You know,
Our
it
high
works
lowbrow
out
show where we think about things and talk about things.
for your ear holes and your sight balls.
That's right.
Jess, I think that brings us to Jess's ear hole corner.
Weird. Joey read this article in The Atlantic from this dude who used to work at a Republican think tank about not keeping score. And it got him on this whole tangent about ambition and like what it even means and how extrinsic and intrinsic motivations play into that. Typically, ambition being muddied very much in the universe of extrinsic motivation. But hell, what would it mean if we focused our ambitions mostly on what intrinsically motivates us? And like, what if we call it the cool name that I came up with, effortless ambition? I have no idea. Maybe that's just the same thing as intrinsic motivation. I digress. Thank you for entertaining us in this little conversation ditty.
Small corrections department. It is a conservative think tank,
Oh,
not
excuse
a
me.
Republican think tank.
Thank you. I apologize.
I alleviated whichever listener was going to send that into the corrections department. I knew you were going to do it, so I just covered off. You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Hey, Jess, guess what?
Hey, what's up?
I've been teaching Emerson to say how much she loves Becky using like more and more obscure astronomy terms. So she's currently saying, I love you further than the Oort Cloud. And she's like trying to say, I love you too, Sagittarius A star, which is the black hole in the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And I'm just like adding these new terms. She can say the Oort Cloud kind of, like you can understand it, but when she tries to say Sagittarius A star, which she's like trying every time to say it, but it's unintelligible.
Did this start from I love you to the moon and back, and then you were like, let's one up that?
She has like some pajamas, and I was like, that's Jupiter, that's Saturn. And so she knew a few of the planets, and then it started with like, I love you too, and she'll go, I love you too, Jupiter. And then it just like progressively got nerdier and nerdier, and I just take her along for the ride, and Becky's like, okay. And all Becky does is just repeat whatever she says, but say like beyond. And so she just one-ups her every time by just saying like the same thing. And then she looks at us like, it goes further? Oh, she won again. It's just basically like just saying like, I love you to infinity plus one. You know, like that's basically what Becky's doing to her every time and ruining it.
So good. She's learning.
Yeah.
She's learning that she will lose this battle every time.
Yeah.
Joey, I have no preamble for my question.
It needs no preamble.
In which aisle does peanut butter belong in the grocery store?
No, obviously the butter aisle.
What? No such. All right.
I'm not.
Okay. I was like, what? I'm about to rage quit this show.
Just hang up. I'm done. Delete. Throws your microphone across the room like Aaron throwing his phone into the couch.
Yeah, exactly. When he's so mad. I do describe something that happens to me called butter insecurity, where I always am afraid that I'm going to need butter and then there isn't any in the freezer, but that's irrelevant. Peanut butter is a totally different entity.
You keep butter in the freezer?
Yeah, pro tip. How else are you going to save all that Costco butter? You can't just keep it in the fridge. It'll go bad.
How much butter are you buying?
Betty Botter bought bum butter. Bah, she said. Bum butter's bitter. And you know why it's bitter? It's because it was in the fridge that whole time.
How much butter are you buying at any given butter run?
4 pounds.
That's like four 4 packs of butter?
16 sticks of butter. At the average Kirkland scale, which is my preferred method of maintaining a lot of butter in the household.
Do they sell this in a 16 stick pack, or are you?
They usually 4 packs of 4.
That's too much butter, Jess.
No. I'm not generally a hoarder, but when it comes to butter, it can go so fast. Think 1 pie crust. That's like a whole pound of butter right there.
How often do you go to the grocery store?
I can't be getting. It's just when you need butter, it needs to be there. You can't just be like, "Oh, I'm gonna run and go get some," because then that'll throw your whole game off.
My butter anxiety is that when it's not about do I have butter, is do I have warm butter? Like, do I have like room temperature butter as opposed to refrigerated butter? Because if you can't spread refrigerated butter unless you get, I can't believe it's not butter.
Ooh,
margarine.
No. What? What did you call it?
Margarine.
Joey, we have to talk about peanut butter. That's the real question.
Where does it go?
Where does it go?
I mean,
what factors decide where it goes?
I constantly struggle with grocery store organization. Like, how are you categorically putting things together?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I have a solution to it, but sometimes I just go places and I'm like, why is this here? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Where would I put peanut butter? I mean, peanut butter is a sore subject because I can't have it anymore. It's just very sad, but
I am sorry for that.
I mean, I would put peanut butter next to the jelly and honey.
Right. So I feel like that is where a lot of stores will decide, but also where that is
next to
confusing.
The bread.
Right? Is it in the bread aisle? And then like that's confusing because those are pantry items. So why would those pantry items be separated from other pantry goods? And also is that like also adjacent to the baking aisle? Usually the baking aisle only takes up one side of the aisle. So you've got like baking, bread, and not all pantry, but this specific type of pantry. It's tricky. And then you've got a question about all of these newfangled refrigerated peanut butters, right?
What? There's refrigerated peanut butter?
The kind that you don't need to refrigerate before you buy it, but that you refrigerate once you've opened it.
Is this like natural peanut butter or something?
Yeah, right. And so there's another piece. There's like a whole epic Judge John Hodgman episode about like where in the home the peanut butter goes if it has been unopened. Do you keep it in the fridge or in the pantry? Because one person was like, well, if it's not opened, you shouldn't keep it in the fridge. And the other person was like, but if it eventually goes in the fridge, I want it to be where it will eventually go. And so there's another argument that could say, like, would peanut butter ever belong in, especially this like natural kind, in the refrigerated section near like other spreads? Mascarpone?
Is mascarpone a spread?
I don't know. It's a like spreadable cheese.
We're just uncovering that you have a lot of very strange food takes, apparently. Just having a party. Did you get the mascarpone spread? We need it. We need it for our onion crackers. There is like the interesting like historical case studies, right? Of like soy juice getting turned into soy milk and putting it next to the milk so that it could be perceived as a dairy replacement.
Yes.
And the cost and sales went up astronomically. I think Silk was the first one that did it, right?
So that's a great question. So then there's another element of this of where should the peanut butter be placed?
Next to the dried nuts.
Next to the dried nuts. Fascinating.
The nut area.
All nuts and dried fruits and maybe the cereals.
Well, I think you need to. The issue sometimes with the grocery store organization is that they're going off of many different categories of organization at the same time, right? Like baked goods go together. So then you have like cake mix, flour, and like sheet pans next to each other.
That's true.
And then like canned goods go next to each other because they're how they're contained, as opposed to like what is the relationship to the food, right? So like should it be like the things that grow together go together type of idea? Is that like your orientation of how you organize the grocery store, or is it like where it goes in your home, or is it X, Y, and is it some other construct that you're doing? I don't know, but I think most grocery stores do many of these like different organizational constructs at the same time. And so that's why when you're walking into a new grocery store, you have like some expectations of where a few things are. Like dairy and eggs are always in like the far back corner typically, because it's
They're
like
loss leaders.
It's a high frequency usage item. So they want you to walk through the entire store.
Yeah.
And things on the outer rim move more in grocery stores. And so if you can get placed in the outer, like the outermost aisle, like up, down, and sideways, then you'll get more sales because people don't go down every aisle, but they typically will at least do the run of the outside ring of the grocery store. So there's also like what is the frequency of usage can also be a different way of categorically organizing a grocery store.
Right, or the business case side that's related to like the nut juices that have otherwise like been able to position themselves alongside milk, and the supermarket trying to increase purchase of expensive peanut butter or even just standard in high volume. Or is it like near the produce section? The produce is almost always, on on one of the peripheral anchors in a grocery store. And it's usually where you start, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like nuts, what if nuts and peanut butter were
Jess, what is your preferred method of grocery store organization?
I know, that's the thing, right? First of all, I think most of the time I am impressed by how often those placards that have the things, anytime I'm wondering, where is that? It is typically on the placard, which is kind of a miracle because I'm like, why is that specific thing the thing that they were able to mark up for me? And I'm trying to remember, like popcorn, for example, like they know that's a weird exception to the aisle rule of like snacks, chips, but like specifically popcorn, in case you're wondering, is also in this aisle. I think I would expect the first thing that you said for nut butters to be in the bread aisle, which I would say is an aisle anchored by bread with other stuff adjacent to bread that they don't know how else to fill.
But then should cold cuts go in that same aisle?
Never the twain shall a non-refrigerated and a refrigerated aisle meet in the same hall, I think. Not that it's also the deli, like I think you should have the packaged cold cuts closer to the deli, which you are unlikely to be able to put in that same space. But then again, should that be where the bread is? I don't know. Maybe we have a fun exercise of how.
But sometimes like the delis will have some bread items, right? Like it'll be like
freshly baked.
The Hawaiian rolls will be like next to the deli, but then the rest of the bread will be somewhere else.
Exactly. Or like the hot dog buns may be located in like a basket near the hot dogs because they're not dumb. They know that you're not eating that plain or with like the weird spaghetti octopuses popping out the middle. Anyway. Well, I don't know. Send us your very strong opinions about how grocery stores are all messed up, and not just about where the peanut butter should go, but all other things that you believe to be in the wrong aisle. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. Last question. Doesn't Trader Joe's like make you go through the entire store?
It's exhausting.
I don't think I've ever been to a Trader Joe's outside of like stopping in like the wine store, like extension of it. because
which
the
only
line
exists
was
in
always
Japan.
so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the line was so crazy. I was like, I'm not shopping here because I don't have time for this. But don't they make you go through the entire store?
They do. Admittedly, I used to be anti-Trader Joe's, and I am a convert. Don't worry, listeners. But for those who haven't been in a Trader Joe's before, you may find it deeply upsetting the first time you go in, because it is not only unintuitive, but it is also frustrating in that you must go down. I mean, you don't literally need to go down every aisle unless you're in a New York one where it's so jam-packed full of people that they basically, snake the line through the aisles such that you're waiting in line as you're shopping. But in every other place, it's more just like things are located in weird spots and you have to go find the soap in the same aisle as the canned goods. So good luck.
Godspeed. Maybe they want it to be confusing, so you have to go through every aisle.
It's like IKEA, but for food. Ugh.
We didn't see the obvious solution sitting right in front of us. It's intentionally confusing.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, how do you design it to be more intuitive so people can have a better time? And they're like, forget that. You're going down every aisle, you idiot.
Or find the special treats, but you have to really look for them. It's like a bargain basement retailer style.
That would be a cool thing, is if every day the grocery store just hid one special item in the store. And if you found it that day, you got a reward because you had to search through like every aisle to find the soap.
I think Nordstrom Rack that on occasion will, or is it regularly, adjust the price tag of one item in the store to be $1. So you could get like a designer dress that's worth $2,000 for $1 if you can find it. We'll have to fact check this one, but I'm pretty sure that's a thing.
We've solved it. Don't make it make any sense, but hide prizes.
Great
Solved.
idea.
We're good. Put the peanut butter wherever. I don't care. Just
put it
give
wherever
me the prize.
And just like,
give me an extrinsic motivator. Oh no, we've ruined it. We've ruined grocery shopping. I take it back. We've not solved anything.
Yeah, that's true. All right, immediate corrections department. It's 1 cent. And I don't know if they still do it anymore, but it's not $1. It's actually 1 cent, which is, a miracle. Okay, that's all.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Recorded. Wherever. Here. Yeah.
There. As always, we like to thank you, Jess, the executive producer and planogram expert, Jess Vander.
I also like to take this opportunity to thank you and Aaron every time I am on the show doing the script sheet with you, because it's just so much fun to thank you when you normally don't thank yourselves.
There we go. And now you screwed up the orders.
Oh, no. I also have to thank sound engineer Alex Gontel for sounding and peanut butter. Do you like peanut butter, Alex?
This is a nightmare.
I don't know how to do credits.
We'd like to thank designer Nora Mestrich for designing and for sending me a lot of iMessage exclamations today that scared me because they made weird sounds when my sound was on my computer. That's all.
And I have to thank the ambitious but effortlessly so crew of Sarah Gilbert, Les Jacobs, and Tony Bonham. Thank you for all your help.
And as always, thanks, Ellen. The peanut butter's in the freezer.
Thank you.
Special thanks.
Special thanks.
Not to natural peanut butter. I wasn't a fan of it when I could eat it.
What brand are you? I'm a Skippy gal.
I think I did Skippy Natural.
Ooh.
Was like where I had landed. But I'll still eat Jif. I like Jif.
Wow.
I miss peanut butter cups. We just did Easter. Thanks to Easter egg hunts. Those are fun. Thanks to my dad, who growing up used to do baby powder bunny prints through our house because we had a brown carpet. So the bunny would come in the front door and it would be like no thanks to whoever invented brown carpets because it was
terrible. That's
hideous.
So horrible.
And we had like the same carpet running through the house like for 14 years that was brown.
God.
I was like, what a terrible idea.
So
bad. But the bunny prints were always fun. And I was like, oh, I could do that this year. And I'm like, we have hardwood floors. How do you do bunny prints? I need to like think this through for next year so I come in prepared to be able to put the bunny prints. But
maybe you could still do it. I'm trying to think of something that's less messy though.
Stickers.
Yeah, but the bunny print is the best part. How cool is that?
I could do wet flour or something.
Oh God, that'll
with like
be a nightmare.
a bunny sponge, but then I have
Becky
to mop
will
after.
not endorse such things. What about baking soda, and you create like a little template and you just dust it over? We're eliminating all the magic, Joey. The bunny is hopping through.
the dusting on the stencil is a good idea. I think I'm going to hang on to that.
Okay.
But doing it dry, I don't know if dry is better because then that's just going to track everywhere. So is it better just to leave some that are wet and then you just have to scrub those spots?
Well, if dry, you can just vacuum them. Special thanks to vacuums.
But toddlers are going to run all over the bunny prints.
Yeah, special thanks to vacuuming the whole floor. Oh, also, how do you feel about Roomba?
Becky wants to get a Roomba, but I don't know that I just don't trust them. I never used one, but like my reaction is like, they're not gonna get everywhere, right? They're like gonna like miss weird spots because the robot didn't catch it.
Yeah, the robot's round, but also like it has those little sweepers, and it's like you still have to vacuum, but they'll just keep after like the little crumbs, the little toddling crumbs that Emerson may produce.
I'll consider it. Okay. I know they've gotten smarter with like you can like mark off all like the corners, but I'm like, there's a couch with a chaise and like a table with chairs. Like how does it get between the chairs and stuff like that? Like
so many questions.
I don't trust you yet, Roomba. Not because I worry you're gonna attack me in my sleep, but because I just don't know how smart you are. But maybe it's very smart now. I don't know.
Okay, thank you guys.
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Bye. You know what that makes me think of? You know that video? I don't know if it actually if it holds up, because sometimes like really old videos don't hold up. But it's the, Barats and Beretta, the two like OG YouTubers who created this video called the Mantaj. And it's like, this here's the Mantaj. You're welcome. And then in the Mantaj, it's just like toxically masculine things, one after another. Like, there's Joe chopping wood. He's like, there's Luke tossing a pigskin. There's Joe not giving a good goddamn. And it's very funny. Anyway, you should go watch it and then tell me if it lasts.